Our next and last speaker is Scott Johnston, who is a staff attorney for Human Rights Accountability at Human Rights First, an NGO based in New York. And there he coordinates a global coalition of more than 250 NGOs working to leverage human rights and anti-corruption sanctions like the Global Magnitsky Act. And he will speak about targeted sanctions and mechanisms. Scott, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Marco. And thank you, David, for the invitation to speak today. This is a really important event, and I'm really glad to be here. My presentation pivots away from the direct monitoring and documentation that we've heard about from Justin and Tita. So before I do that, I did just want to thank both of you for those wonderful interventions and acknowledge that I know from many of the partners we work with that the work that you do oftentimes comes with a significant amount of risk and sacrifice. And so I didn't want to fail to acknowledge that and to offer you my thanks and also my support. The reason that I'm here speaking today is that I'm an expert on targeted sanctions mechanisms like the Global Magnitsky Act, which is a topic that we have heard about increasingly in the context of the types of violations that we see in the Philippines and Indonesia. And we have a lot of NGO partners around the world who contact us to learn more about these mechanisms and understand how they might be able to leverage them in their local context. This is particularly true in an era when rising human rights abuses and also rising impunity for those abuses is really a hallmark of what's happening around the world. And we see that different countries are adopting these types of targeted human rights sanctions mechanisms at a rate that's really quite shocking and would have been unthinkable even 5 or 6 years ago. And so trying to understand how these mechanisms work should hopefully be helpful in your work. And so I'm happy to do that today to the extent that I can briefly. Just a quick overview. I want to provide a quick overview first on what targeted sanctions mechanisms are and how they work. So different governments around the world all have the ability to implement sanctions. Targeted sanctions mean sanctions against specific individual actors and entities. And so as opposed to countrywide embargoes or economy-wide embargoes, these are specific human individuals or specific companies that are being sanctioned for involvement in certain types of abuses. And the sanctions tend to involve 3 major penalties. The first is asset freezes. So if those people have any assets within, for example, the United States, if the United States were to be the one implementing the sanctions, then those assets are frozen and they're not allowed to access them or transfer them anymore. Second is a prohibition on US banks and businesses from doing business with those individuals, which in the case again of the United States, effectively locks sanctioned individuals out of the legal or licit international dollar market, right? All dollars eventually flow through the US and nobody in the US can touch dollars that have been touched by a sanctioned person. And then finally, they also involve visa restrictions. So if a person has a visa to come to the US, it's revoked. And if they try to get one, they're put on a list where they can't. And then of course, lastly, they are publicly announced by the US government, again, just using the US for now as the primary example, as someone that the US sees as a global abuser of human rights and a persona non grata, which also tends to limit their ability to engage with other countries and sometimes can even limit their political capital within their own country. So there are a lot of different sanctions mechanisms, but for the purposes of today, I'll focus exclusively on the Global Magnitsky program within the United States, and just to help you understand that this is the US government's targeted program specifically dedicated to human rights and anti-corruption, but is one of many, many different programs that the US government runs, which sometimes can be applicable in certain cases. And if people wanted to understand better how those worked, I'd be happy to set up one-on-one conversations later. The US government started using its global Magnitsky program in 2017 and has used it at an unprecedented pace. Since 2017, the US government has sanctioned 319 total perpetrators of human rights abuses and corruption under the program, which is far higher than what was expected before the program came online, and certainly much higher than was expected during the Trump administration. We've seen in the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration a continued emphasis on using these types of tools to counter human rights abuses and acts of corruption, with 73 of the total 319 designations coming out since the Biden administration took office. A couple of things that are important to note about these is that, one, as I had alluded to before, the US was the first country to create this type of mechanism, but they're quickly spreading to other jurisdictions. So Canada, the UK, and the EU, and Norway are all significant jurisdictions that have adopted these types of laws, while Australia and Japan and New Zealand are all in the process of considering adoption of similar laws. And there's been a recent significant pivot, both in the US and in other countries, towards increasing multilateral use of these types of mechanisms, which is something that we certainly endorse at Human Rights First. But one of the important hallmarks of these is that these types of sanctions are fully discretionary. So even with the Biden administration's willingness to use them in an aggressive way, they can still be very difficult to actually get imposed in practice. And we work with organizations around the world that submit cases to the US government recommending sanctions. And to the US government's credit, we have seen them really listen to NGOs. And by our count, about 35% of all of the current designations under the Global Magnitsky program have a basis in recommendations that we facilitated on behalf of civil society partners around the world. So they're still certainly listening, but it can be very difficult to get them implemented, particularly in countries like the Philippines, where the US has a generally positive, but complicated, I guess is probably the best word, relationship. The best, just as a quick overview, if you're interested in potentially pursuing these types of designations, what's important to know is that you need to be able to provide evidence of violations that are recent. So within the last 5 years, but ideally that demonstrate ongoing behavior, violations that are systematic and pervasive, that are violent in their nature towards the victims. So certainly EJKs and torture fall within that scope. That identify discrete perpetrators of the abuses, so they don't just document crimes, but they also demonstrate what perpetrators are responsible for those crimes, and that have at least double corroboration, independent corroboration. So at least two separate credible sources providing information to corroborate the claim. My last note that I want to make, I'm recognizing time is short, is to say that we have seen the US government use these types of sanctions against countries that they consider to be partners. A good example of this was against members of the Saudi Arabian government involved in the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And we have also seen them use these in one example for cases of encounter killings in Pakistan, which follow many of the similar hallmarks to what we currently see in the Philippines and Indonesia. So there are certainly precedents for these types of cases being done, but we have still never seen them use these sanctions within the context of the Philippines and Indonesia to date. So the one exception here for some people on the call might be that you might be aware that last year there was a news article related to visa sanctions against De La Rosa, a major member of the war on drugs from the Philippines. However, those visa restrictions tellingly were done privately, so there was no public announcement by the US government, which might be an indication, at least under the previous administration, of a lack of willingness to confront this issue in a public way. That being said, there's certainly many reasons to try, especially in an era and a situation where impunity for these crimes is so widespread. So what I would like to finish with is simply extending an offer for anyone on this call who'd be interested in understanding better how you might be able to apply these types of mechanisms within your own jurisdictions. To please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my number, or I'll put my email in the chat. And I'd be happy to talk about it in greater depth and strategize about how you might be able to engage with these mechanisms within your work. Thank you.